Today we're going to be looking at the value of magazines. Now a lot of these vintage magazines are still out there, and what got me interested was a trip that I had to the charity shop a few weeks ago. But before I start talking about this, what I'm actually doing, if you haven't seen my videos before, is I just generally look at what's trending on eBay, what's selling, what's hot, what's not, and start looking at things that maybe we could niche out at when we're outsourcing, because it's great to have a niche, a certain thing that we all look for and that we are an expert in. But sometimes you just can't find that particular thing when you go to car boots or charity shops. So it's always good to have a plan B, a plan C. You get where I'm coming from. Other things that we can source. So I went to the charity shop a few weeks ago and I picked up these magazines for 10p each. They're called Homemaker and they are brilliant because they're just so iconic of the 70s. The clothes, the fashion, the furniture, and the adverts. Got these for my daughter Blue. She's studying media at the moment, and one of her topics is she's studying the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. So she can probably do something with these. There's no money in these before I go on, so there's not a lot of money in them at all. But it got me thinking about magazines because the lady in the charity shop, she said to me, every other charity shop she's worked at before normally throws old magazines like these away. And it's not something that just happens occasionally. It happens on a regular basis. Magazines do get thrown out. Old catalogues get thrown out. So I asked her if she could put them to one side for me, and she's going to have to speak to the manager about that. All this stuff, though, that's getting chucked out, it'd probably be good and beneficial just to strike up a acquaintance with the local charity shop people, get to know them a little bit, take some good things down if you're donating stuff, build up a rapport with them, and then just ask occasionally if they can have a look at some of this stuff that's destined for the bin. A lot of the times these charity shops will either fob you off, they'll say, I'll take your number, and they won't phone you back, or they'll say outright that they just can't do it, this stuff has to be chucked. But occasionally you'll find one or two charity shops that you'll manage to strike a rapport with and they'll help you out. So anyway, what I learned from my studies. So I looked at different magazines last night. I looked on what they're selling for on Vinted, eBay, Marketplace and Amazon, etc. I got a pretty rough idea of certain magazines that we should be looking for. So I've got to start off by looking at the Eagle Moss magazines. Now these were famous, throughout the early noughties to the present day. They basically come with a die-cast figurine, a lot of them do. And they also come with different parts. So there's one where you could build a DeLorean out of Back to the Future. As you can see here, once the DeLorean is built, it's worth about £1,000. But you need to buy these magazines with all the original parts that come with them. Like, for example, Star Treks, as you can see here. These come with, it's like a die-cast, do you know what, it's just slipped my mind. Starship Enterprise, that's it. Starship Enterprise ship with it. And they're fetching like £200 or £300 if you can find them with the book and the ship attached to them. And the same with these DC and the Marvel figurine Eagle Moss magazines. So some of the figurines, as you can see here, they fetch like £30 on their own. Some of them, complete with the magazines, can fetch 50. So certain Eagle Moss that you need to look for, things like Lord of the Rings and stuff like that, can be quite tricky. You really need to get a good bundle if you're going to sell them. Although there is the occasional Lord of the Rings figurine that does well. But if you can get a good deal on them, if you can buy quite a lot of them in the bundle, they're well worth picking up. Excuse me a minute. So, looking at music, Kerrang. I used to love buying Kerrang magazines in the 90s. I'm looking at these and I'm seeing a lot of interest in My Chemical Romance. So I love My Chemical Romance myself because I'm a bit of a metalhead. So I wouldn't really call My Chemical Romance heavy metal, though. It's just quite light. But a lot of their stuff, with Gerard Way featured on, fetching like £200 to £300. Some of them are a little bit less, some of them 100, some of them 50. But yeah, if you get in Kerrang magazines, if you see anything that's MCR related, pick it up. So also, there was a book called Smash Hits that was more like 1980s. That was like kind of like a pop music scene, stroke top of the pop sort of book. And if you can get like certain ones that have got like, for example, Bon Jovi in these magazines, then these magazines go for about 40 quid each. So they do generally have to bundle these up to try and get any decent money out of them. But the occasional one, like Alice Cooper, Bon Jovi, you can get some decent money. So, okay, we're talking about like Citadel and Warhammer stuff now. Warhammer magazines do really well, but they do well in bundles. But you want to look out for one called White Dwarf. Now, White Dwarf, this is going around in the 70s, and the early editions can fetch £200 or £300 if you can find them. So that's that. Let's move on to something a bit more spooky now. So, if we look at like monsters and things like Freddy Krueger, for example, the Freddy Krueger magazines here, there was 2 of them released in the 80s. A lot of these that I've seen sold have been graded, but I've seen a few of them sell in pairs for like £100 to £200 for a set. So they're worth looking out for. And in the 60s, there was something called Famous Monsters, and it featured things like Herman Monster and Frankenstein, all kinds of stuff like that. These magazines go for about 200 each, 100 to 200, so these are really worth sourcing. Okay, what else have we got? Oh yes, we're looking at TV now. Now you probably all remember when we were, back in the 80s, or probably not all of you, because you're not as old as me, but we had 4 channels on TV, and the highlight of the year was getting your Christmas TV times. Now, Christmas TV times and Christmas radio times generally hold a lot more value than the others, but even some of the normal TV times and radio times magazines can fetch some serious money. As you can see here, Doctor Who from the 70s, 200 or 300 quid, brilliant. And then you've got things like Carry On's a bit later. What else? You got the Star Wars one. These are iconic. People pay some crazy money for them if you can find them. A lot of the ones from the 80s are generally trending around about 40, whereas as you go back to the 70s, then you're looking at like more in your hundreds. So yeah, really worth looking out for those books. We've got to be talking about video gaming now. So video gaming, Nintendo Power magazines. The very first one was in 1988, and these can fetch a crazy £400. I've seen people grading them and selling them for a lot more. But yes, that is for your very first one that was released. As you get down to maybe issue 73, money does drop a little bit, but generally still in the hundreds for quite a lot of them. So it's really worth trying to find these Nintendo Power magazines. If we're talking about Commodore 64 Zap, though, what I had, you're lucky to get a tenner each on them. You have to bundle them up and you could probably get a little bit of money. So they're worth looking for also. And remember, it's all about condition too. So, some of the other things that I did notice that were pretty decent to look out for was One Piece, which is a manga magazine. And this, I don't think it's going to be very difficult to find. It's from the 80s, it's One Piece, it's the first one that was ever released, and it's worth about £1,000. It's trending from 800 to 1,000, and some people have graded them and got a little bit more. There's also a magazine called Weird Tales. This one goes back to the 1930s, so there's some crazy money to be made in these magazines too, if you can find them. Formula One. Now, I love Formula One. And in the 90s, I used to buy these books called Formula One News. Now, on their own, they don't fetch a lot. But normally there was about 20 of these, not books. these magazines a season. So each season will have about 20. If you've got a bundle of 20 for that season, it's like 50 quid a bundle. I've seen these sell on a regular basis, 50 quid a bundle. But you've got to complete the season. And there was about 15 seasons of these books. So if you was to find a big collector selling these, you could potentially make some really good money. Okay, so we're going to get a little bit risque now. Looking at Vogue magazines. I remember Vogue. In the 80s, my sister bought one and she was really... it cost her a lot of money. So it was a very expensive magazine back then. And she loved her Vogue magazine. She spent ages reading it. These magazines are iconic. And the very first one, as you can see, is fetching a lot of money. But more recent magazines from Vogue, like 2016, 17, certain topics are fetching some crazy money. So yeah, even like modern Vogue magazines are worth looking for. They do bundle up well too. Now we're going to get a little bit more risky because we're talking Playboy. So the Playboy magazines, there's a lot of dealers out there looking for them because the money is absolutely insane on these. So the first edition was Marilyn Monroe, and to be honest, it was a lot more tame back then. Before they started to go a little bit too far with them. So when we say we're talking too far, we're talking like the Pamela Anderson sort of era. So if you've got a copy of the Pamela Anderson ones, looking at 200 or 300 quid, Danny Minogue too, and people like Joan Collins. So it's just like iconic ladies from the 1980s, probably a little bit before. I think Danny Minogue's more 90s. But yeah, 200 or 300 quid on these magazines. I also found out they did a Playgirl magazine too, and I've only ever seen one of these listed, one particular edition, and this has sold about 7 or 8 times, all fetching from £300 to £500. So get out there and get hunting for magazines, and just start studying. That's what I do. Occasionally, I take a night out and I start studying different things. So I think magazines is a really good thing to look out for. I'm going to be looking at catalogues next, because things like Argos and Littlewood's catalogues, they can fetch some really good money. So I'll leave you with that for now. Thanks for watching today. Have a great weekend and stay positive.